It's not a present mode. Okay. Live bloopers. Uh, I wanted to talk about the basically the birth chart of the United States. So I was watching one of John Paulo de Coco's videos recently, and he posed a different birth chart for the United States. So what I thought I would do is I would take what he stipulated as the birth time in the United States, and then kind of work it back into the Vedic system and take a look at it, and also take a closer look at like the dasha systems and stuff. And what I want to do and stuff, what I want to do is I want to compare that chart with the traditional birth chart of the United States that's used by me, and actually Joni Petrie uses it a lot too. And so what I want to do is just go back and forth and just kind of see if there's like any real legitimacy to either one of those charts. And I think you'll be really excited with what you see, especially if you like using the United States birth chart as I do. It's actually pretty reliable in both circumstances. I haven't done very much research into the second chart, but the first one I've been using for quite a while now, and I've gotten some decent predictions out of it. So, when was America actually born? So this is a subject of debate in astrology in general, because when you talk about the birth of a country, what criteria do you use? Do you use, like for the United States, do you use the signing of the Declaration of Independence? Do you use the when the first Constitution was ratified? Because if you think about it, the United States started because we use that current document. Do you use the inauguration day of George Washington, since he was the first leader? And so it's generally agreed upon that the signing of the Declaration of Independence is the birthday of the United States. And so that's one that I've been using. So if you take a look at this chart right here, this one was actually given to me by Joni Petrie, and it's also used by a lot of other astrologers. So let's see, this was on July 4th, 1776 at 6:30 p.m. in Philadelphia. So I think what this chart is reflecting is at the time when the last person actually signed the Declaration of Independence. So Joni said that she knew an astrologer that went into the National Archives and did some research on this. So he came up with 6:30 as the time when the last person actually signed the document. So if you're taking a look at this chart, this basically puts the United States in the Vedic system, or the sidereal zodiac, as a Sagittarius ascendant, and that kind of makes sense to me for the United States, because if you think about Sagittarius, it's all about self-righteous action, wanting to be the leader in ethics and things like that. Now, of course, if you don't live in the United States, and if you're looking recently, people would be like, okay, the United States is all about ethics, but Sagittarius is all about like rah, patriotism and things like that. And when you think about the United States, for the most part, Americans are pretty patriotic. They're pretty big into their own country, even though they don't say it. It's a pretty strong thing here. So looking at some of the other placements, if you take a look down here near the bottom of the chart, you'll see that the United States has the Sun, Jupiter, Venus, and Mars all in the sign of Gemini. Now, the United States really does seem more like a Gemini country to me than Sagittarius, because when I think of the United States, too, in some other contexts, I think about invention, innovation, coming up with crazy out-of-the-box ideas, being a little paranoid, making rash decisions sometimes, trigger happy. I mean, that's all very Gemini qualities. Like duplicitous, they'll say one thing, do another, and America does that sometimes. So America, to me, seems more Gemini, at least in its nature. So having all these planets in the sign of Gemini, to me, makes sense. So anyway, beyond that, let's see. There's Neptune and Saturn in Virgo. That's in the 4th house. And we got the South Node and Pluto in the sign of Capricorn. And then the Moon is in Aquarius. Then Uranus is in Taurus. Now, Uranus in Taurus really makes sense because if you think about the United States, really, I mean, it's money. It's a very, very money-driven country with the capitalism and everything like that. And Taurus being the sign of money and capitalism, I mean, the United States comes up with creative ways to make money for good or bad. And that's a very Uranian type quality too. So And the other thing too that you can use is the dasha system. So this is a snapshot of the dashas of the United States chart that was just on the last page. And what you do is you look at the year that the major dasha is starting and see, does that really correlate with any major events in the United States? And so usually I'm looking at like wars, presidential elections, economic shifts, and things like that. So looking through here, see 1793, that's roughly when the Constitution was ratified. Let's see, we went into Saturn into 1809, then so that was kind of the War of 1812 era, and then you had Andrew Jackson, a lot of national expansionism. Mercury, more so of that. This was actually a very peaceful time in the United States history, the early 1800s, since Europe decided to not go to war, we were not at war. So after the War of 1812, it was actually pretty peaceful in the United States all the way up until the Civil War. So that was a Mercury time. Then in 1845, we kind of got into the K2 period. Can't really think of what was going on around then. The next thing you're kind of looking for is the Civil War. So that would have been during the Venus period. Then 1872, that was the westward expansion. So going through all these, you can see right here, like some major dates, like 1929, it started a Saturn period. That was like right after the stock market crash, and that would count for the Depression era. And here in 1948, Mercury kind of started around the time of the Cold War. 1965 in K2, we had the tumultuous times in the late 60s up until 1972. 72 through 92, that was kind of like, the Nixon, Reagan administrations. A lot of other stuff happened then too. A lot of economic expansion though, which is really, that's very Venusian. This is also too in the sign of Venus. I think was in the sign of Gemini. So think about it. It's all these like great. I think that was the biggest time of wealth expansion in the United States history. Although we could arguably be going through it right now. Let's see. The Sun, 1992. That's when Billy Bullock got into office. The 90s. So. And the 90s were pretty quiet. Well, let's just face it, compared to how it is now. 1998, starting at the Moon Dasha. Then, of course, we got the Mars Dasha switch right when the economy crashed. And then we started getting into the Rahu Dasha, and that's where we are right now. So that's what we have for that. And then what I did is I also pulled the fixed star report. And here we have Phact, Alhina, South Assisi. So none of these are actual, they're not very major. Like Phact is... somewhat of a major star. I think that could bring material wealth and things like that. But the rest of these, they're not very major fixed stars. So they're not of any particular consequence. So this is the chart posed by John Paulo. And he thinks that the United States date of birth is going to be on July 2nd, 1776, and I think it was at 4:06 p.m. in Philadelphia. So his reasoning for this was that that was the time when they actually agreed upon the language and actually voted on. That was the time that they voted on the Declaration of Independence, whether they were actually going to declare, I believe it's when they were going to declare, this is when they voted to declare independence from Britain. And so he figured the last guy came in there, cast his vote at 4:06 p.m. in the evening, and this is all in Philadelphia. And so you take a look at this chart, and this pushes the United States into like a Scorpio ascendant, which I think actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, is the United States fairly Scorpio? When you think about Scorpio, it's all about like passion, wanting to uncover things, conspiracy, control, wanting to, I think there's a big control factor, a little bit of passion, passive aggressive, highly emotional. Is that the United States? I would say there's a good case for this. And the reason why is America is pretty emotionally reactionary. Too, like Scorpio, when you think about how the government actually deceives people all the dang time, that's a very Scorpio thing to do. Scorpio is about deception. So this actually, I think, is a very good fit for the ascendant of the United States. Then the other thing, too, that he mentioned, and I want to direct your attention up here, over to the left side of the chart, where the Pluto and Moon are exactly conjunct. And this is pretty interesting that this happened at this time. And I think John Paul probably ratified the chart to get these two planets to be pretty close. But you know what? It still doesn't matter. matter because even if it was an hour either way, the moon is still going to be very, very tightly conjunct Pluto. So let's give them the benefit of a doubt and say this is correct. Wow, that is a lot of energy, subconscious, pure, raw, emotional energy in the United States. So I think that might be a little bit too much. But also the interesting thing is the United States is coming up on this Pluto return. This is going to be happening in like 6 years, and that happens. This was from the founding of the country. It's the first Pluto return in the United States. That's going to be fascinating to watch. Let's see other things too. I think this is. We got a retrograde Mercury here in Cancer. And then let's see the Sun. So pretty much everything else. Let's see the Sun, Jupiter are both in Gemini, and then Mars and Uranus in Taurus. So this is a little bit more kind of like a spread out chart. It's more splayed. I think it's more even keeled than the other chart. Now the one thing though that I want to show you, the other thing, is so if you ever want to run this chart, feel free to do it. You're going to get different results in Western astrology, but check out some of these fixed stars. All right, we have El Nath. Danger, that's a pretty generic, that's a very generic interpretation, but I figure this could mean danger of violence. Sirius with the sun, a royal star. This is interesting because Sirius is a fairly powerful star, but it also has, it's not really considered a good fixed star. It actually has tragedy associated with it. So I don't know if this necessarily describes the United States, but I mean, there has been a lot of tragic upheaval in this country, but I wouldn't say that that's really unique to the U.S., so I'm going to throw that one out. It's kind of spitballing here if you can't tell. No. So if you take a look here, this is the most interesting one to me. Altair. Altair is really the star of courage, bravery, charging in. It's also, too, represented by Aquila the eagle. And I mean, when I think of the United States, I think of the eagle, our bird. This one I think is very telling. I think this is a dead-on ringer that this is a very good match for the birth chart of the United States because when you have a fixed star conjunct the moon, it's going to be more, and especially the sun here too, like Sirius is a major fixed star and so is Altair. So when you have the sun and moon conjunct fixed stars, it gives it more power because those bodies tend to move faster than other planets, especially the moon and the ascendant. If we saw the ascendant conjunct one of these, that's like, wow, that's a lot of power. That's very unique. And that also applies to you in your birth chart. The ascendant is the most important, then the moon, then the sun, okay? And then after that, it's going to be the chart ruler, which is the Lord of the first house. So anyway, this was very fascinating. So I very much agree with this. And then also, too, if you take a look at the Dasha cycles, just going through here. Here, the War of 1812. This one really stuck out to me. This was really, if you think about it, the end of our war with Britain. The War of 1812 was actually an extension of the Napoleonic Wars, but starting into the Jupiter period after the War of 1812, that's really when the United States became a country, I think. That's when it was like tested, somebody came in, invaded, it survived, people stayed together. So that one rings very true to me. The next one that stuck out here was in 1864. We're getting to the end of the Civil War, so this could probably just be adjusted maybe an hour one way, and this might get closer to when Lee surrendered to Grant. So yeah, then you have Reconstruction in K2, man. This, I think, is very, very telling in the United States because during the Reconstruction period, the South was completely devastated. Everybody had to turn inward, and this is kind of when the United States almost had to redefine itself. 1871, westward expansion with Venus. Yeah, here we go, 1914. So this was when just right before World War I think this is when World War I started, but we didn't get into World War I until I think 1915 or 1916. So then check this out. This goes all the way through the roaring 20s till just right before FDR was elected, okay? So this is about a year before that. Actually, no, he was elected in 1832. He was sworn in 1833. So now we have this Jupiter New Deal expansion, and this is through the Depression. But then after that, so this is when the country was in a very major, almost kind of like a socialist liberal expansion. But then when you get closer here to like 1948, this is when Saturn begins, and this is when the United States really took a big conservative swing through the 1950s and early 1960s. And this was also too when the Cold War began, even though that technically began in 1945. Though this is really close. I found this really interesting. And then, of course, we get into the Mercury period in 1967. That's kind of when the hippie generation was kind of the counterculture, switched everything around. Let's see, 1984, I don't know if I necessarily agree with the K2 period here. Venus in 1991, of course, this is the economic expansion of the 1990s, 9/11. Then Sun, okay, so the Sun was in 2011. Not really seeing much correlation there. Now, this moon, this is interesting. So right now, the moon's shifted over in 2017, according to this chart, and that moon is conjunct Altair. So I think we're actually going through a lot of major changes right now in this country astrologically. So stay tuned for that stuff. So anyway, so to get to my conclusion, I actually like John Paulo's chart a lot better than the original birth chart for the United States. So if you want to go ahead and rewind and check out the chart for yourself. I put the birth information on there. But yeah, run it, see if you get good results, play with the transits. That's what I love about astrology is we can always do more research and put more research up against other research to actually see what works. There is no such thing as a settled chart, okay? We can always try different things. All right, well, thank you for joining me, and I hope you liked what you saw. If you want to book a reading with me, go to nobsyoga.com. Otherwise, have a good evening.